Hi, everybody, members on the A and all the lecturers and the students. Okay, it is a very wonderful experience that I ever experienced from the Yulianti presentation today about the humanity Buddhism in the modern Indonesia. Okay, first of all, I would like to share my opinions about how I'm going to immerse myself in the Buddhist life because uh, if you see my biography, actually, I was one of the students, diploma students in Mahavihara Buddhist Temple. Okay, Mahavihara Buddhist Temple, and I spent almost a 1 year program to study Buddhism. The reason I engage with the Theravada Buddhism because I need to know the real human values that Yulianti just now they mentioned, the real human values from the religion ethics that really will change our mind to think, to perceive differently. Because if you see the entire society, we can always see if we like knowing the real, the originality, the human values behind it, we can apply into our social life, into our society. I remember one of the wonderful subjects, okay, the Buddhist social dimension that I learned before, that taught us, okay, the course content taught us how to um, experience, how to learn the teaching of Buddha in order to apply in our daily life. So from the just now the presentation about, I think it's about 1 hour and 50 minutes. I learned a lot. Okay, I really learned a lot. I think the members on the A also learned a lot. How the evolutions of the Theravada Buddhisms, the just now the four entities that I mentioned just now, the Theosophical Society, and the Java Barbarian, just now Yulianti that mentioned the Buddhist associations, some of the Chinese temples that I learned from your thesis. You can see our ancestor, because I'm also the Malaysian Chinese, I believe we also came from China. Okay, we bring our ancestor values, for example, the Confucianism, the principle of 中庸, the principle of 仁慈, okay, kindness and the sympathy. So in order to practice as a Chinese community in Southeast Asia, that you did mention about Peranakan Chinese also, they try to embrace it, the good values from our ancestor. So the good thing is when they are going to engage with the Buddhism, actually I can see some of the Peranakan Chinese, they are more inclined to the European thinking because some of the Peranakan Chinese that were migrated to overseas, or they are maybe they have a better education in overseas. They try to incline to the European culture and forgot some of the good values, good Chinese values from the ancestor. But by practicing the religion's values, we can obviously see and experience how the power of the teaching of Buddha actually they can make it ourselves to be a better people. You can see the how to say, the relationship between the religion ethics with the practices in our daily life, especially from the Buddhism perspective, the five precept and the noble evil path and all sort of the good values. They can change the people that we always perceive the same. So I just want to ask the members of the floor, and just now I did type. If you would like to raise up your questions to Dr. Yulianti, you are free to voice up your voice. If you are shy, then you can just type in the in the chat box. Or after the presentation, maybe if you have time, you can just keep contact with Dr. Yulianti. But I really learned a lot from the today presentation. I hope that every one of us really appreciate today's presentation from the historical perspective. And you did mention in your paper, and you say that even from the citation, the donor Sherrill, they always focus about the Buddhist majority countries, Laos, Cambodia, and others country, Thailand, and always Myanmar, the Burma. But the lack of focus or this kind of research that is really considered under research. Especially we want to focus about the spread of a Buddhism, the humanity Buddhism in Indonesia, in the Malay world, such as Malaysia and Indonesia and Singapore, even Brunei. So hopefully in the future, I can keep in touch with Dr. Yulianti. So I want to ask members on the floor, on the air. So any questions? Any question you would like to? Okay, here got a one question. Good evening, Dr. Yulianti. I'm on from University Malaya speaking about revolution of humanity Buddhism. May I know why Asian China will focus so much on rituals, commercialize it instead of humanistic Buddhism? Dr. Yulianti?
Okay, yeah.
Based on your expert.
Yeah. So but I really I will answer this in this way with because first as the I'm not a very expert in Chinese Buddhism, you know, about so I'm afraid that I cannot give a very satisfactory answer to when we're talking about why ancient China will focus so much on rituals and commercialize it. So I would actually see about what happened in Indonesia. I think, you know, during in late 19th century and also early 20th century, when we're talking about 1900, for example, in early 20th century in Indonesia, you know, one of the criticism that the Peranakan Chinese, you know, at the time, you know, it also in the wake of Confucian revivalism, you know, in late 19th century and early 20th century was in the awakening of the revitalization of Chinese culture in you know, in China, and also in for the Chinese overseas in many different regions, for example, in Singapore and in Malaysia and also in Indonesia, where Confucianism actually arrived eventually in 1900. So at the time, actually, I think as the Peranakan Chinese said this, because they did not know about the teaching of Buddhism. For the case of Indonesia, there was a barrier of language. So the Peranakan Chinese in Indonesia, who had been in Indonesia for many generations, they were not, they already not able to speak Mandarin.
Yes.
So they don't have access to learn about Buddhism from the Chinese monk who actually resided in the vihara, in the kelenteng, not vihara at the time, it was kelenteng, the Chinese temple. So they cannot communicate with them, and they cannot learn about Buddhism. And then what they see at that time is that the Chinese monk were mostly performing about the rituals, but it's actually go beyond that. You know, that the kelenteng actually was not properly used for religious purposes. So there was they were becoming a place where the homeless actually reside, you know, refuge, like they just stay there and sleep there, you know. So it was not really used for the religious purposes. So it was almost a parallel problem what happened in Chinese temples in other places out beyond the China mainland. So I do really apologize that I cannot directly answer this with looking at the case of the China mainland. Why actually this the the practice, the theorization, I call it as the, the deteriorating of Buddhist practice within the Chinese temple for during my study. So, and then it actually awakened the awareness of the Chinese, the Peranakan Chinese at that time, to actually go back to the culture, revitalize the Chinese culture. And then religion was part of for the Peranakan Chinese in Indonesia, the Chinese religion was part of the culture, part of the identity that need to be revitalized, so to align with their Chineseness at the time. So to Ong Kai Won, so I really, again, I have to apologize that I cannot give you a concrete answer on the Chinese case about this, but I would like to take a note on it, so that probably I can, maybe if you give me your email address or anything, I can also connect it with you in personally with regard to this your questions. So yeah.
Okay. Wonderful answer raised out by Dr. Yulianti. So last we can see some of you, okay, JH, okay, did raise up the question, could humanities Buddhism be thought of as a secular movement rather than a religious movement? So Dr. Yulianti.
This is great question.
Yes.
This is a great question. I haven't thought about it, but when we are talking about the movement, I think I believe that when we are seeing that the humanistic Buddhism as a reform, as a reform movement, I think, a reform movement, because it was addressing a concrete problem within the monastic practice and monastic problem, and actually, with the intention to actually remove that the negative practice at the time. So I think the religious movement or the religious reform could also be suitable to this. Of course, when we are looking at the value that this humanistic Buddhism actually tried to bring, where it is very, very, very inclusive, and it's really centered to the how to elevate the individual or the human quality. This we can also see it as a secular movement, because what happened is Master Xing actually in his teaching tried to break the barrier between this monastic and also the lay people things, that this also break the boundary between the religions, that this should not be, religion, race, and shouldn't be a barrier to the practice of this humanistic Buddhism. So in that sense, of course, we can say that this can be a secular movement, but then again, I think there are different ways to see and also to perceive this, see it as a religious reform, for example, because it was stemmed to the intent to remove the negative practices and revitalize the religious practices, especially to the monastic order. So I again will highlight that there are several ways to actually see the humanistic Buddhism, So, and Master Xing Yun, if we read the handbook that he wrote about it, it's really we can really see, and hopefully later even have a better understanding about what he meant about the humanistic Buddhism, So why he used, for example, the human, as to address the monastic problem, why not why he did not limit this only to the monastic people, but he even expand this practice to the daily beyond the monastic wall and beyond the rope. So yeah, so I think you really hit an important question here when by asking about the secular movement and also the religious movement. Really, really thank you for that question. It really also makes me think and very stimulating. So the next one,
Dr.
yeah,
Yulendi, I have a question to you because
okay,
just how you did mention about the generational change about the Buddhist movement in Indonesia. Okay, are there any challenges for Indonesian, Buddhist practitioners to practice humanities Buddhism to be a global Buddhism in Indonesia? Are there any changes? Because you see, because I did came out the research about the Chinese businesses in Indonesia. I found out Chinese Indonesia, the majority of them are undergoing a very tough time. For example, the Order Baru, the forced assimilation policy. Sometimes we hardly to differentiate, the assimilation policy. Everyone is the same. Some of the Chinese, I can see that they can't speak in Mandarins. Some of them, the doctor generation, they can speak. How this kind of the Buddhism that can be expanded or grow as a major global Buddhism in Indonesia. So I would like to hear from you based on the just now the two questions combined.
yeah. Okay, so it's again like a very interesting
Yes,
questions. So yeah, I think when we're talking about the challenge, right, of
yes,
the humanistic Buddhism in Indonesia, so I think it is really depends on how fluid people's view on Buddhism itself. You
yeah,
know, what I mean by the how fluid is that Buddhism is never one after
mm,
the Buddha has gone,
yeah,
right?
yes,
So if we have a better understanding about that,
mm,
that Buddhism is never one after the Buddha passed away, then
yeah,
I think we should be ready to actually learn about Buddhism. This heterogeneous Buddhism.
heterogeneous, yes,
Yeah,
yes,
the heterogeneous Buddhism.
mm,
So I always mention this when I'm teaching. Say like, when you're studying about Buddhism, I think you shouldn't start with just Buddhism in singular.
mm,
You should talk about Buddhisms.
yes,
No, because Buddhism is never one. It's never homogeneous. It's always heterogeneous. And I think the barrier to for in this case the humanistic Buddhism is about the view that the people have. And also I think, but then the strength of the humanistic Buddhism is that it emphasizes on the practice of the daily life of practice, so bringing Buddhism alive in our daily life. So I think that can be a strength to actually introduce a humanistic Buddhism, how important it is Buddhism to our daily life, by showing a concrete example, for example, such as the program that had been done in Indonesia, how not rigid Buddhism can be, for example, so that it is actually also can be very attractive and also very fluid and also very dynamic, you
yeah,
know. When if we are talking about the challenges, I think the only challenge is about the perspective of the people have about Buddhism itself. If there is, for me, the question of whether Buddhism what is the origin of Buddhism and not origin of Buddhism is already out of question. So, because Buddhism never won after the Buddha passed away. So I think we should always be ready to learn, and most importantly to collaborate with other Buddhism,
yes,
because and then we can start talking about Buddhist society,
yes,
the Buddhist society, Buddhists who practices a different kind of Buddhism, you know
because
So
you did raise up the some of the important points. You say the Mahayana Buddhism and the Theravada Buddhism, they try to reject the concept of the humanity Buddhism. So that's why I, based on your point, so I just raised up the question: are there any challenges in order for the Buddhist practitioners to sustain, not to say that to sustain, to pass the knowledge to the next generations, and moreover, from your thesis and from my understanding, I found out there are plenty of Catholic or Christian. Okay, please correct me if I'm wrong. They got the plenty of Catholic or the Christian universities, but for the Buddhist university, I never heard any of Buddhist university in Indonesia. Maybe they got plenty of that. So this kind of a Peranakan Chinese community, I think they are faced really the challenges in order to pass the Buddhist knowledge from one generation to another. So if you see the next question, even Fu Yetming, okay, she also mentioned, what do you think the humanities Buddhism is agak
agak lambat.
lambatnya
Yeah,
in
yeah, yeah.
Indonesia?
Okay, yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, maybe
Yeah,
you can answer why is it still late to
yeah,
practice
okay.
in Indonesia?
It's, when we're talking about late and not late is quite tricky, right? Because it can
Yeah,
be relative, right? So
yes.
I mean, it also depends on the perspective that we have and seeing that. But
Mm,
before going there, I think I would like to make a few comment on the presence of the Buddhist University in Indonesia.
yeah.
So what we have actually in Indonesia now is Buddhist college. So it's a higher Buddhist education.
Yeah.
So to be good Buddhist teachers, you know. So we do have, I think, at least 11 Buddhist colleges in Indonesia.
Oh,
And yeah, and then the students of these Buddhist colleges in Indonesia are from different places in Indonesia, like from Jawa, from Sumatra, from
Medan, maybe. Yeah.
Sulawesi, from Bali, Lombok. Maybe Anandawira that I have shown in my presentation also established one of the founders of the Mahaprajna Buddhist College in Jakarta. And then we do have the state-owned Buddhist college in Tangerang. It's called Sriwijaya Buddhist College. And then also we have Nalanda Buddhist College.
Nalanda, yes, yes.
And then in Central Java, we do have Nalanda, yeah. And then in
That is the
Central
same.
Java, we do have 3 Buddhist colleges. Semaratungga, Sailendra, and then the Raden Wijaya Buddhist colleges. And then in East Java, we do have one Buddhist college called Kertarajasa Buddhist College. And then we do have one in Medan, I think Bodhidharma. Actually, many of the participants are actually the Javanese and also Balinese and then Lomboks and from Sulawesi and so forth. So I think we do make a really good effort in making a new generations to teach about Buddhism. So I think one of the strategic way to actually introduce humanistic Buddhism is to include it in a curriculum of this higher Buddhist education. Like, I mean, if we are talking about this, how to do a strategy, what kind of a way we can actually practically do with this humanistic Buddhism is to include it in a curriculum, because the humanistic Buddhism also have a high concern on education and also on art and also on a culture, you know. So these are actually I mean, I think the board of the for Guangsan, I think, also can be take it as an approach to actually bring this humanistic Buddhism out there in Indonesia, for example, you know, by collaborating with these Buddhist colleges in Indonesia, so that this can be part of the teaching. Because, you know, if you see the handbook of Master Xing Yun, there are set of teaching about it, you
Yeah.
know, and then all of the teaching that is actually said in the handbook there, I call it handbook, although it is not a handbook, but it, you know, we can translate it into practice, because this humanistic Buddhism is actually practice,
Yes.
you know. So yeah, so I think it should be suitable, and actually that can also bring a barrier, because the later these students who are actually students of the Buddhist colleges are going to be teachers, and also going to be important figures, Buddhist important figures in a society. For example, becoming Sunday school teachers, and then also becoming how to say, pendeta, you know, a priest, Buddhist priest,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah.
So the value about my a few comment, and now I'd like to address the question about the agak lambat. So I think this is the agak lambat comment was a comment made by the Venerable Swahwa, and Venerable whom I'm having interview with. So I think he just make a remark, because I think the Dongjian Malaysia, the Fogwangsan Malaysia have already developed far before Indonesia, you know, and then the Fogwangsan and the Master Xing Yun have devised this humanistic Buddhism decades before, you know, and then Indonesia only actually started in 2020, you know. So we are in his perspective, I assume, but I forgive me if it's not proper. So in his perspective, that the humanistic Buddhism in Indonesia is only come recently,
Yeah.
you know. So, but yeah, so I think the collaboration aspect that he mentioned in the interview was really the important aspect that that should be done by the Buddhists in Indonesia, you know, that everyone is not just walking alone or something like that, and that Buddhism are really seen as in a bubble or something. So that is how I address the question from Fu Yatming. Really, thanks to your question. Yeah.
So that means Dr. Yulanti tried to say it's not lampat lah. Still other chance kan.
You are very good at translating it.
Still other chance.
Yeah. It's really, lambat is very relative. Yeah. So we just
Yeah.
started. So I think yeah, but since it was his word, I need his permission to change.
Yeah, yes. We learned a lot from your presentation today.
Thank
I'm
you.
so surprised. I'm so surprised that this one, the few entities that you mentioned, the Java Buddhist associations, and this is the first prominent leader, also Ashin
QnA.
Jinarakita. Can you just explain a little bit of a brief history about, is it he was the founder, or he was the, how to say, the priest to spread the Buddhism? I mean, the first person, the first leader to spread the Buddhism in Indonesia.
You mean the Yosias Pandins, or?
Yeah, the Ashin that you Jina Rakita.
Oh, Asin Jinarakita.
Yeah.
So Asin Jinarakita is when we're talking about Asin Jinarakita, we mostly talk about the revivalism of Buddhism in post-independence time. So
Yeah.
he is the figures, one of the important figures for Buddhist in Buddhist history after the colonial times.
Yeah.
So Asin Jinarakita also very interesting figures. He was a Peranakan Chinese also, you know. Yeah, he was a Peranakan Chinese, and he was interested in a spiritual life before he actually active in a Buddhist society. He was also a member of the Theosophical Society. So the history of Buddhism in Indonesia is very closely related with the Theosophical Society, you know, that presented in Indonesia in late 19th centuries and early 20th century. So Asin Jinarakita was the chair for the Theosophical Society youth organization. And then he started to know about Buddhism, and then later on he became the student of Venerable Penching, you know, a Chinese monk from the mainland China. So from there, and then after that, actually, he become also was active in a Buddhist society. You know, um, uh, there's this Samkhao association. You know, the three
Somehow,
religion.
yes.
Yeah, somehow the three religions association in post-Indonesian time, and he was also one of the board of the organization, and he later actually went to Burma,
Burma, yeah.
Myanmar, and got ordination in there. So that is the start when the Indonesia actually began to have a monastic order. So it started with the Asin Jinarakita being ordained as a Theravada Buddhist monk in Myanmar, Burma, and then he returned to Indonesia as a monk, and then he became the leader of a Buddhist society in Indonesia. So he taught about Buddhism, and then he initiated the establishment of a Buddhist the layman Buddhist organization, you know, the Upasaka and Upasika
Upasaka, yes.
organization. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And then at the end, in the 1959, he actually initiated the first monk ordination in Indonesia by inviting various monks, you know, Theravada monks from countries in mainland Southeast Asia, like Myanmar, of course, because his teachers was from there, and then Mahasi Sayadaw, right, and then the Bhikkhu Narada from Sri Lanka, and then monks from Thailand, from Cambodia, and Laos were invited to Indonesia to hold upasampada or bhikkhus ordination in Central Java. So he, of course, is an important figure together with his students, you know, and also some other figures who actually already played very important role before the Indonesian independence period. For example, the lady Chua Hin Hui or Wisaka Gunadarma, who very active since the year of 1920s, you know, and he actually went to Singapore, you know, and received the Buddhist flag from the uh, uh, Buddhist Association in Singapore. So that was the first Buddhist flag that actually brought and introduced to the Indonesian Buddhist Association.
World peace.
So, yes.
Yeah, Buddhist flag, world peace.
Yes,
Yeah,
the world Buddhist flag. Yeah.
yes,
And also
yes.
there was this actually interesting data about the Malaysian Buddhist syndicate, you know.
Oh,
Yes, I found this in the newspaper. So there was because I was like really using the sources from the Malaysia, the Strait settlements
yeah.
newspapers, you know, the Strait Times, all those that I actually got it from the NLB, the Singapore library, National Library. So I found this interesting connection of the Buddhist organization in Strait settlements, of course, Singapore, Penang, especially, and then Indonesia. So these three regions was very interestingly connected in the even in early 20th century. So yeah, we can talk forever about
Dr.
yes.
Yulanti, last question I would like to ask. So that one, the Buddhist courses all taught in Bahasa Indonesia. I mean, in Indonesia or English, perhaps.
Oh, in Bahasa Indonesia.
In Bahasa.
Bahasa
Oh,
Indonesia. Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Not Chinese, even for the Mahayana Buddhism.
No. Yeah,
Ah,
yeah, no. Yeah.
no.
No, I think the barrier of what is the language can be an important
Yes.
barrier, I think, here, that many of the study on Buddhism in Indonesia is in Bahasa Indonesia. or we
Oh.
use the English translation. So, and then about this language, I asked Venerable Ruin when I was joining the youth program in last December. So my question was, oh wow, this is very interesting because most of the participants of the youth were the uh, uh, the young people from different area in Java, and obviously they are Javanese who don't speak Mandarin. So,
Yes.
and then I asked like, is there any language challenge present in here, and how do you overcome this? So, and then I repeat that question again in my interview with Venerable Xiao Jiao, and then what she said was that, and because the ITC has a program on doing translation, so
Oh.
everything that they actually taught to them in the course and also in the program is actually in Bahasa Indonesia, and that they're all coming from different countries, for example, Indonesia, Malaysia, or Singapore, where they who speak actually Bahasa Indonesia. So of course there are still Mandarin here and there, but it is according to Venerable Xiao Jiao, it is because of the Venerable were very familiar with the Mandarin during their time of study in Foguangsan.
Ya,
So
tapi
yeah.
beranakan Chinese bisa ngomong bahasa Indonesia.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, of course. Yeah. Many of
Yeah.
them actually cannot speak Mandarin also.
Yeah, yes,
Yeah.
I experienced it also.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But it is, of course, a very an interesting aspect that we easily take attention on is, of course, the language.
Yeah.
But it's also like, when we are studying about Theravada, for example, which using Pali language,
Yes.
also that many of them, the student, they don't directly read the Pali, but it's mostly on the translation. So yeah, in that I think the translation really play a very important role in bridging the, in
Yes.
bridging the participant and all the knowledge, I think.
And of course the Dhammapada, yeah, the teaching of the teaching of a Buddha and the teaching of the Abhidhamma. They're also very hardly to translate into Bahasa Indonesia.
Yeah.
By thinking, yes, especially the Pali language that I learned before. Luckily, I passed in the exam. Yeah, that is the most difficult paper. Yeah, the meaning is
Congratulations.
yeah, the translation.
Okay.
Yeah, okay. Last but not least, okay. Here the last question from actually it's not a question, from Li Hua Fa, and then he just add on, okay, some of the ideas that previous Dr. Yulanti mentioned about the ancient China's. I think Mr. Ong did
Yeah.
raise out the question just now, and then Li Hua Fa, he added the ancient China started rituals and praying ceremonies were started during the end of Song till Qin dynasty as open that time. People needed to rely on something to move on. I think, yeah, now I understand why they are more practicing the rituals rather than the humanity Buddhism. Yeah, that is one of the factors.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes. That's end for today. I will stop the presentation, okay, by today. So it is my pleasure to engage with Dr. Yulianti and also Mr. Ong and all the brothers and sisters on the air. So if you guys have any questions came across your mind, you can just email to Dr. Yulianti, and maybe the next I will keep contact with Dr. Yulianti about my next project about the Chinese businesses in
Pleasure.
Indonesia. Maybe I need your help to come up with some of the ideas about the Buddhist ethics behind it, the human values behind it, for how to form this kind of Chinese businesses in Indonesia to be a social entrepreneur that we always talk about it, how to advance their business from day to day, because my area of study actually in business and
Yeah.
in Chinese business. Maybe we can
I do
talk
have
in the future.
an article on
Yeah.
Buddhism and Buddhist economic, because
Yes.
my
S-
master thesis was on Buddhist economic. Yeah, so I was doing an interview with the Buddhist entrepreneurs in Indonesia. So
A
I
small
can
is,
share you when the
yeah.
article that my
I think the article that is a small is beautiful, right? Something like
oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Yes, yes,
Zumaker,
yeah,
Zumaker. Yes, the
yeah,
book on the
yeah,
beauty, the a small is beautiful. Yes.
yeah.
Okay. They got one new message. No. Okay. Just thank you, Dr. Yulianti from Jane Lau.
Thank you, thank you.
Okay.
My pleasure.